Hey everyone, I'm Grace, and I just have to thank RGD for inviting me to speak here, as well as all of you for sticking around and being such a gracious audience. And I've got to be honest, when RGD first reached out to me, I thought, why do they want me to speak? I'm talking about behavior change. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm not a communications designer. I don't have killer shoes like Forrest Young. I don't know if he's in the room, but those gold shoes are amazing. But over the course of the last day and a half, listening to the incredible array of speakers, Stephen and Aaron and Gemma and just so many others, as well as talking to some of you, I think I'm going to hypothesize that there's a common thread between all of us. And it is that we believe in the transformative power of design, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I call that one brick at a time, and I'll explain that as I talk through the presentation here. The other confession that I have to make is that while I've been to 18 countries in my life, this is the first time that I am a visitor in Canada. So thanks again. Yeah. And I actually happen to be married to a man named Alonzo Franklin Canada. So my married name is actually Canada. And I actually bought this teddy bear because my children asked me to buy something with their name emblazoned on it. So, so this is my souvenir. Just a little bit more about me. I was born and raised in the States, and I was then, at the age of 10, asked by my family to move to Seoul, Korea. Seoul is here, part of South Korea, not here, where there's a little bit of craziness happening right now. And at the time, it was the beginning of the Asian economic boom. My father was asked, along with a lot of expats who had been educated overseas, to come and work for companies like Samsung and Gold Star. And as a result, I ended up at an international school, starting in elementary school, middle school, high school. And it was this amazing experience because the kids at the school were kids of diplomats and kids of international business leaders. And I was surrounded by this amazing thought leadership and these conversations around how we might actually change the world with what we're doing. So I started small, and I started collecting pins so that when the Olympics came to Seoul in 1988, I thought, I know, I can be worldly, and I can make that part of my identity. And so I became that really stupid, annoying kid who was chasing around guys like this with my paltry collection of pins, saying, let's trade. And I have my Canada pin that I got here on this trip as well. So later on, moving on from pin trading, I had some more notable experiences. I got a chance to meet Princess Diana when she came to Korea and visited our school. I worked with the United Nations Children's Fund, and I started to develop this connection to the world and the ability for all of us as individuals to really make a difference. And I wanted to do that on a global level. So that left a lasting impression, and I had these fairly lofty visions of how to change the world and make it a better place. So when I started college at Stanford, I was convinced that I would study international relations, that I would work for the UN, and that I would become a diplomat. I would become just like Princess Diana. And then I took my first political science class in college, and it turned out that dream was very much a dream. It was one of the driest classes that I had taken. No offense to political science majors out there, if you're out there. But it also awakened in me this reality and this realization that, if I want to make a change and make it quickly, policy may not necessarily be the right way to go about doing that. So one day, I was in my dorm room, and I was in the hallway, and there was another product design student who was working on a project. And it turns out that he was working on this project to redesign the nozzle of a hose for his arthritic grandmother. And I thought, wow, that's so cool. That's super hands-on. He's making a difference. Maybe that's something I could do as well. That's making a change. That's doing good. And furthermore, you can see it. You can see right at your fingertips what that difference is. So that to me meant, there's a way, another way to actually do good for someone. And maybe that's how I can do good in the world. So I switched majors. So instead of going down the path of diplomacy and international relations, I became a product design student, which at Stanford is actually about learning the design process, about problem solving, about need finding, and uncovering these latent needs. It's a little bit abstract. In other words, I was not at all marketable. So if you're a student here, make sure you leave school with some pretty hard skills. And it'll make finding a job a lot easier. So this led me to David Kelly, who you may know. He is the founder of design and innovation consulting firm IDEO. And he eventually became my advisor and my mentor. And I grew up with what we've been talking about today and yesterday, this notion of design thinking and human-centered design. And I became hooked on the idea that design actually has the ability to shape how we navigate this world. More importantly, I was inspired by the potential for design to connect people with what truly matters to them and do this in their day-to-day. In other words, how can we get people to be engaged with what's important to them rather than just compliant with what they should be doing? So through design, I believed that we could change, how someone might be happier in this world, build relationships, connect, learn, feel good, maybe even live with a sense of purpose. And that seemed much more appealing than always striving and then perhaps failing to do the right thing. So before I go into the potential of talking about design, let's look at where design has been. Design thinking, which many have already covered, has only recently become part of the business or even the design vernacular. When I started my career over 20 years ago, it was still very nascent, and no one had I don't even think that the term design thinking had really been coined. It was nascent. Design was still famous for the things that make a sound when they hit a table. And I don't believe the world had yet realized the impact that design, big D or small d, could have on it. So thankfully, design leaders from the past had already begun to articulate the value of design in the world, including Dieter Rams, who was head of design at Braun for many, many years. You might recognize two of the shavers on the left, which he designed. You might be using one of the ones on the right, which is the more modern version of this. So he set an amazing foundation for what good design should be and codified the principles of the craft in these 10 principles of good design. Everything from good design is innovative, good design is unobtrusive. In fact, good design is as little design as possible. The one that really hits a chord for me right now is principle number 4. Good design makes a product understandable. It clarifies the product structure. Better still, it can make the product talk. At best, it's self-explanatory. Most of what he's saying here is that good design is just intuitive. It's almost instinctual, and it just makes sense. Just like a door handle that sticks, out of the door when you're supposed to pull it, or what Jane Fulton Surrey calls thoughtless acts, right? We also adapt to the world without thinking. How many of us do this? This is actually my teacup. I do this all the time without even thinking about it. I've seen lots of other people do it, right? When there's no place to put your used tea bag, we make sense of the world around us, and when we have it adapt to us. These are affordances that we encounter every day. And more formally, these are known as Gibsonian affordances, named after the American psychologist J.J. Gibson. These are cues in the environment that tell us how something should be used, right? We should all be familiar with this as designers. And this is design that cues behavior. This is behavior that goes with the grain. This is, as Ellen so eloquently stated yesterday, like the arrows in an IKEA that guide us through the labyrinth. Or maybe it's a beautiful red button that cues emergency, so we can find it easily. And sometimes that's really all that's needed to make life a little bit better, just like the nozzle at the end of the hose. But sometimes even cues lend themselves to greater change. So I'm gonna be a little vulnerable for a second. This past winter, I actually went to Lake Tahoe, California with my son, who's 11, and some of his friends. And of course, the last run of the day, he was like, "Mom, let's go through the terrain park." And I consider myself to be a decent skier, but the terrain park is full of ramps like this. And I thought, yeah, okay, I can do it. I've had a pretty good day skiing, so why not? So of course, my son and his friends took it. By the way, that's not me. That is not me on the screen. I did go for it. I thought, I gotta prove my son that I'm a cool mom. And I think that's about, 7 feet in the air. So I took the jump, and I really don't recollect a whole lot. But I came down, I landed perfectly on my left ski. My right ski, on the other hand, did not land so well. My ski did not pop off, and my knee hit the ground at about 90 degrees from where it should have been. Sorry for that graphic description. But I'm fine now, right? I'm fine. So, of course, I was in shock. I actually got up. I took my ski off. I got up. I put it back on, and I skied down the mountain. And I was fine until I got down, and then my knee started to swell up. And so days later, I walked into the doctor's office for an MRI. And this was actually the MRI scan that took the photo of my knee. Anyone here ever had an MRI scan done? Okay, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry that you've had to. But for those of you who haven't, it's like this sonic machine gun. It's super loud. You have to stay absolutely still for 30, 45 minutes, and it's completely freezing. So all the right affordances, right, to cue just like, get me the hell out of here. And in fact, you're supposed to stay absolutely still. So a story that I've heard many times before actually really struck me at this moment. And in case you haven't heard it, I wanted to share it with you. It's the story of an industrial designer whose name is Doug Dietz. And he was the guy responsible for designing these MRI machines for GE. So one day, Doug was observing a newly minted MRI machine. And he was so proud of his work and the team that his work had done, the work that his team had done. And then he observed a parent cuddling her daughter who was absolutely terrified of going into this machine. And there was nothing he could do about it. And he kind of stepped back from this sense of pride and asked himself, how do I make this a better experience? How do I make it not terrifying? And in fact, how do I improve? How do I improve all the cues? So he embarked on this effort to change up the script of the experience. He turned the MRI room into this set of wildly adventurous stories where initially kids had freaked out. They were being asked to stay still, not because the MRI wouldn't function properly if they didn't, but because there was a bear lurking outside, and they didn't want to disturb it, or maybe there was a pirate who would recognize the ship if they were to make a noise and reveal themselves. So in this case, a kid's going camping and sneaking away into the tent, and the technicians are on the other side of that camper guarding them. So there's an entire story that's been weaved around this experience. And the next time Doug Dietz actually witnessed a kid and a parent, the kid came out of the MRI experience saying, "Hey, Mom, can we come back again tomorrow?" It had actually become delightful and enjoyable. And I love this story so much because it goes beyond just dressing up technology. It sets the stage for a much more aspirational behavior. The designers of this asked themselves, why would you stay in this and hold still for 30 or 45 minutes? And then they design the elements into the story that spurs creativity and way more than just, let's get this MRI done. So furthermore, it's not just the patients who were positively influenced here. The staff actually started to design costumes that went with the theme. Submarines under the sea, or a cable car ride in San Francisco. The entire nature of their job had changed. Can you imagine? You went from trying to sedate and hold this terrified kid still to being a character in a Disneyland-like experience. And the interesting tidbit here, too, is that because they didn't have to sedate these kids anymore, they were able to get many more kids through, which increased their revenue and lowered their liability. So there was actually a market benefit here as well. So this is a great example of how good design doesn't just cue behavior. I believe that good design actually enables good behavior. And you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with behavior change? You said one brick at a time. Well, these cues are actually a big part of it, which I'll come back to just in a bit. So I used to be part of the food and beverage practice at IDEO, and big food would come to us and would ask for new innovations in packaging and new innovations in food. And we spent a lot of time, of course, thinking about how to get people healthier. We worked with Jamie Oliver to figure out how to get more healthy food into schools. But we learned, no surprise, that it's really hard for people to be good all the time. Think about walking down the street. It's nearly impossible to avoid food imagery and all kinds of pleasure. And who doesn't love a good soft serve every once in a while? Apparently in Canada, it's practically a religious experience. I have been looking for this brand. I haven't found it yet, so if anyone has a recommendation for where I might find it, please let me know. Only we're in Toronto? Are you kidding me? All right, I'll have to fly to Toronto. All right. Anyway, the point here is that, again, it's really hard to be good all the time, or even most of the time, or even half of the time. So we have to help people do this. Fast forward a bit from Dieter Rams, and we have another guy whose name is Richard Thaler. You all might be familiar with him. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. And you've probably read something behind his book Nudge, or the more academic term, choice architecture. So choice architecture is just the belief that if we put things in the right place or create cues at the right time, people will make better decisions. Everything from putting salad bars in front of the dessert or everything else so that that's the first thing that you encounter and therefore you will choose it. Or the more slightly insidious example, I don't know if there's a CVS in Canada, but this is essentially a drugstore, right? It's why you might get a notification on your phone as you're passing by a CVS, if you have the CVS app, notifying you of any sales going on. And if you add to those nudges rewards and social influence like leaderboards, and this is a Fitbit badge, my 2 dots leaderboard game, many of us design these moments every day. So bravo for all of us, because they work. They work in the moment. And I'm sure all of us have taken just a few extra steps, so that we can log that badge on Fitbit, or played 2 dots just one more time to beat our friends. That's me on the left. I'm winning. Yes, I played 248 levels before that. And then recently, I was on my Peloton bike, which is a connected bike with classes, and I love getting. This is also me being vulnerable, but I love getting a virtual high five as I'm in my class, just like sweat pouring down, because these are incredibly effective means of positive reinforcement. It's proven science, right? Positive reinforcement. So most, if not all of these, are extrinsic motivators. They're valuable suggestions of behavior in the moment. Some might even view it as manipulation in the most negative sense. But at best, it's short-term change. And there are times when all you need is short-term change. Maybe that CVS ad at scale will actually have an impact over the long run, both on you as well as on everybody else who's got the app. Or maybe it's the sign in the parking lot when you're going to the grocery store reminding you to take your reusable bags into the store. You only have to do those things once. And there isn't this progression of change. So what about long-term behavior change, right? What about all these healthy behaviors that we're wanting to adopt? But again, it's so hard. How do you get people to get to where they want to go and keep going? And as designers of any sort of behavior change, it's important for us to focus on what I call people's WIFM, their what's in it for me, their why, their goal. That's really at the heart of intrinsic motivation. Put another way, how do we design for what really matters to people, and specifically, what's at the heart of that change? And what better challenge than to tackle this than with addiction? So I currently lead a team of designers, both product designers and marketing designers, at a company called Carrot. We're a digital health company with a both hardware solution, a software solution, and a coaching model as well that actually helps people quit smoking. Yeah, there are still a lot of smokers out there. I joined Carrot because the opportunity to save millions of lives is absolutely massive. And just to put that into perspective, in the US, there are 40 million adults who still smoke. Most of them say they want to quit, and actually half of them try. Unfortunately, half of them will also die of smoking-related illness, because it's the leading cause of preventable death. And put another way, a little bit more tangibly, it's also equivalent to 3 747s crashing every day with no survivors. So, as we know, people have tried for decades to get people to quit smoking. So why do I believe that design has the power to do anything about this, to change this? Well, first of all, I've seen it firsthand. I've seen people quit using our product. But also, as designers, it's because we're the masters of taking the things that people care about and then creating these contexts in which we can bring them to life. So like Dieter Rams had his principles, here are a few principles around designing for long-term behavior change. Number 1, lead with empathy. When I first joined Carrot, I set out to understand this gigantic delta between, wow, there are a lot of people who say they want to quit smoking, So why is it that so many people are trying and failing? And so I went out into the world and I talked to people, talked to smokers, former smokers, in their homes, in cafes, in bars. And I met a woman, actually, who had been testing one of our early prototypes. This is a photo of her doing a card sorting exercise with me, and let's just call her Kelly. So Kelly was a lovely woman, a little bit older. She had been a smoker for 35 years, and yet she was living life really aspirationally. She had just started her organizing business. The other thing about Kelly is that she had just come out of the hospital 7 days earlier, and she told me that she woke up one day gasping for air and unable to breathe. So she was taken to the ER, and they diagnosed her with COPD, which means cardiovascular COPD, which is something that, which is a lung disease that a lot of smokers get. So the day that we met her was actually the first day that she had had a cigarette. And she was devastated, and by the end of the interview, she was in complete tears. And she said, I don't know why I can't stop. I don't know why I can't stop. I don't want to go out suffering. I don't want to go out suffocating. I don't want to go out feeling like there's a pillow against my face. Like, can you imagine living with that fear? So, and she's not the only one. She's not unique in this. So many smokers feel this way. They've lost their confidence to change, and they don't believe that they can do it after decades of trying. On average, a smoker will try 7 to 10 times before they've successfully quit. So we have to remind them that they aren't being judged. One, smoking has been completely stigmatized, that they have choices to make, and that they can do it. They can make the change if they want to. So we've set out to completely change the conversation around smoking and quitting. And what we're saying to people is, you know what? Don't quit smoking today. Yeah, it's provocative, but it's also realistic and it's empathetic, because we know what it takes for people to make that long-term behavior change after so many years of addiction. We also remind them that we believe in them and that they can do this, right? Like, it's so hard to say, oh yeah, I'm gonna quit today, today's the day, I'm gonna quit cold turkey. And by the way, cold turkey is just a myth. It doesn't work. If you ask somebody who say they quit cold turkey, they've probably tried many, many times before to quit cold turkey. So just like the unicorn, just like the Loch Ness Monster, just like Sasquatch, cold turkey is a myth. And we're starting this dialogue with people who've been shunned and stigmatized. This conversation is not about trying to sell our product or even talking about the benefits of quitting, but it's about relating to somebody and giving them the confidence back that they can do this. All right, so principle number 2, help people imagine the best future and then help them get there. People need a plan. There's a lot of talk these days about understanding your goals and then setting up this plan for how to get there, right? I think, who's Marie Kondoing everything these days, their space? Jane McGonigal, the renowned game designer, talks about helping people imagine the most epic wins and epic outcomes, and then giving them the means to actually achieve these epic outcomes. So this has to do with carving out a plan, but planning is utter drudgery. I hate planning. And when you think about kids, they also see planning as utter drudgery. So as a parent, I'm always experimenting with how to be a better parent, specifically with how to get my kids out of the house on time. I don't know how many parents there are in this room, but I've tried rewards, I've tried consequences, I've tried encouragement, competition. Yeah, I think you all know what I'm talking about. Nothing really seems to stick. But then my husband sent me this amazing article from the New York Times, And it caught my attention because it was called The Secret to Magic Mornings, Put the Kids to Work. The author talks about how he actually was able to get his 5 kids, I don't know who has 5 kids these days, but out the door on time without conflict, with everything they needed to get done. Anyone want to guess what the trick was? Like what he used to actually effectively get his kids out? Yeah, a plan, right? A plan, and more specifically, a menu. So I was super inspired and felt all experimenty, and I had my son and daughter both create a menu for breakfast and lunch that was a bit like a room service menu, right? Like put all kinds of stuff on it every week, like mark off what you want, and all I have to do is go and buy it. And this was my daughter's menu. I realized that to a room full of graphic designers, this is probably pretty cringeworthy, but I love it, right? I love it because, 1, it's totally her personality, but 2, it works. It's fully personalized. I had nothing to do with it. The other week, my daughter and I actually went to the store and we had this thing. It's kind of crinkled because we had it in the front seat of the shopping cart. And we were literally going up and down the aisles, picking all the stuff that was on her menu. And the trick is that the kids have to make their own breakfast and lunch in the morning to allow us to get out the door. The only reason why we're ever late for school is because I'm always running late. But that's a conversation for later. So I didn't give her the menu in this case. She had all the skills to create one herself with just enough guidance, right? She knew that she couldn't stick Skittles or cotton candy or, Pop-Tarts on the menu because it's not a free-for-all. She needed just enough structure to help her make good decisions. And it turns out that there's some science here. There's a validated approach in behavioral science called self-determination theory. And self-determination theory is a well-studied approach to human behavior change that focuses on motivational quality and has found that behavior is more likely to be changed and maintained when people are self-motivated, right? Like, I've got to want to do this, and I need to figure out why I want to change. So in layperson's terms, the success of long-term behavior change is dependent on an individual's motivation. So self-determination theory really quickly has 3 components. Autonomy, which is really that need to feel choiceful and volitional. You need to feel like you're the originator of your actions. Second, relatedness, which is the need to feel understood and valued by important others. And third, competence, the need to feel capable, effective, like I can do this. I feel confident enough and actually optimally challenged enough that it feels like there's some growth there. One of the fathers of self-determination theory is a professor named Edward Deci, and he says, don't ask how you can motivate other people. Instead, ask how you can create the conditions in which other people will motivate themselves. And for me as a designer, this is a really clear call, right? Oh, I can actually design those conditions in which people will motivate themselves. So at Carrot, we've created a product called Pivot. And Pivot is a 6-phase journey, which, as I mentioned, includes hardware and software and coaching. And it steps people through a series of activities that parses up quitting. And we always say, the 4th stage of our journey is actually quit. We don't start with quit. You don't have to eat the elephant all at once, because we know that tackling a small challenge at a time, just like those small plans, can help people build someone's capacity to change over time and can, in fact, boost their understanding and their confidence. We ask people to just do one thing at a time, one challenge, one task, which minimizes the sense of failure and increases the sense of progress. So in one of those phases, you simply become more aware of your smoking behavior. That's what our hardware does. It's a carbon monoxide breath sensor. In the next phase, if you're ready to quit, you build a quit plan. Then you practice your quit plan. Then you spend time preparing people to support you. You get your environment ready. You actually amass the tools that you actually need to actualize your quit and put that stake in the ground. So design helps this become part of the person in a really fundamentally different way. It's not like going into a doctor's office and having somebody hand you a pamphlet and say, yeah, now go do this, actually quit today. It allows people to feel like they're not dinging themselves. Which leads me to the third principle. All right, so once you have a plan in place, how can design help? Just like the door handles and buttons we design, we need to create cues to prompt people to change their routines. Okay, another bit of self-experimentation. As I mentioned, I'm constantly late. I'm probably going to be late kind of giving this talk. I recently made 2 changes to help me better be on time. I started setting my alarm a little bit earlier. That's actually my nightstand and my phone on the left. And I also bought a clock for my bathroom. So I changed both A and B. Anyone want to guess which was more effective? B, yes, because I actually liked the design of my IKEA clock, but also because it was simply a cue. Like, it was really hard to try and wake up at 5:30 every morning when I previously hadn't been doing that. But actually putting an alarm clock, or excuse me, a clock in my bathroom was just that little bit of an incremental change. So again, good design often takes what feels like rocket science and makes it actionable and not overwhelming. For someone who's trying to quit smoking, this is exceptionally important because slips will happen, lapses will happen, relapses will happen, and we need to get people to try different strategies and come back to new ones if they don't work. And imagine if we took a page out of CVS's playbook. You know, what if we could, I don't know, take what CVS is doing to push ads and apply that to people to help them prepare to quit. So, for example, if you have a craving, maybe you're near a bar. Maybe you have a craving, and Pivot can tell you that you might be somewhere near where you might be potentially have a craving. So we can give people these tools in which to work their time through the craving. All you need is a couple minutes of distraction, or maybe it is just giving people one thing to do every day. The one caveat here is that these cues are not enough to keep people going. Again, they serve as helpful nudges in the moment, but since it's so hard for people to be good all the time, we need to point them back to their motivation to change in the first place. And to do this, I want to borrow a little bit from design. So as designers, we see things out in the world, and we're inspired, and we have all these ideas. So we actually build things, right, to try and make the world a little bit better. In the world of advertising and fashion, our process often moves straight from observing something out in the world and then moving to a solution. This tendency is totally true in startups as well, right? We don't have time to think about why we're actually seeing what we're seeing. So in the practice of design thinking, we actually do spend a lot of time trying to make sense of what we see out in the world. We observe something interesting, and instead of jumping straight to solutions, we ask ourselves, what's the big idea here? What are some of these patterns? We spend a lot of time figuring out what those opportunities are so we don't miss the things around us. It's kind of like asking why. Why is this thing actually happening to make these broader conversations? Because guess what? You don't learn from getting it right? Just like Stephen was saying, we know this as designers. We preach iteration. We know it's not going to be perfect the first time around. So it's important to do that in behavior change as well. If something isn't working, ask why. Enable people to come back and reflect on why or why not. Create this closed loop that helps people iterate. Because when the next time someone feels like they're unable to change, we need to remind them that it's not you who have failed, it's just that idea, right? It's just that strategy, so try another one. We need to design experiences to help people identify why they want to change and then tie everything they do back to that. Quickly, the last point is collaborate with experts. When I first joined IDEO 15 years ago, we prided ourselves on saying, we don't know anything, right? We came with this naivete because we were innovators and we were able to see everything with a fresh lens and fresh eyes. And it's still true, our clients know their business best, but it turns out we as designers actually know a lot. So we wisened up and we started hiring some experts. We tried experiments like hiring a food scientist who I got to work with to prototype actual food when we were working in the food and beverage space. We actually hired my friend Giant, who's a neurosurgeon. So when DARPA came to us and said, there's this thing happening where we might be able to implant things in people's brains to get them to interact with the environment differently, we thought, okay, that's a little questionable. But also, could that potentially be an opportunity to design this brain-machine interface that could actually help people, say, veterans with PTSD? And for me, collaboration is really critical. Heather is a behavioral scientist who I am tied at the hip with. She is an expert in tobacco cessation, and without her, it would take me forever to make sense of all this science myself. This is an image of a lot of people. If I can get this pointer to work. This woman here is Dara Dots, and she actually created the first 3D printer to go on the International Space Station. This is Anna Young. She's the founder of a nonprofit called Maker Nurse, which is now called Maker Health, that actually creates these prototyping spaces in hospitals so that nurses and physicians could come in and literally just jerry-rig some solutions. This guy here, he is head of the Arctic medical team. And this woman here is Susanna Fox, who is the former CTO of the HHS, the Health and Human Services, a government organization which essentially establishes policy for healthcare in the US. And Susanna called me up one day and said, hey, I've got this idea. You know, there are a lot of extreme environments that we're designing for, like space, like the Arctic Circle. What if we brought all these people together and we started to design solutions for extreme environments on Earth? And so, lo and behold, we met up with all of these people and we were talking about what might loneliness as we're traveling to Mars look like? And who's designing for that? And actually, are there analogies to what loneliness on Earth actually looks like? So that by nature, the design process is very inclusive and optimistic. As we know, it involves going broad, exploring possibilities. You know, we can't get stuck in this behavior that was parodied, some of you might have seen in this video, which I want to play now.
This specimen has unfortunately fallen into a state commonly known as pixel paranoia. Lizzie is contemplating whether this button should be here, or there, here, or there.
It's funny because it's super ridiculous. I'm sure it strikes a chord with all of us, but there's some truth to it as well. So one last story, because I'm over time. This woman, we'll call her Kelly as well, is somebody who I recently interviewed. I had the privilege of speaking with her. She is 45, and she's been smoking since she was 15. 40 cigarettes a day, which is 2 packs. I promise you she's real. She's a tattoo artist, believe it or not. And she described herself as someone who would always be a smoker. She was like, oh, Philip Morris is part of my family. And after 10 days of being part of Pivot, she actually quit. And she said, here's why. Because when she first spoke to us, she said, well, can I still smoke? And we said, of course you can. This is your decision. We led with empathy. And she said, it was just all the right bits at the right time. We helped her imagine and plan for the future. And she said, I know I've got people on my side, and I have my straws, right? Like that was her craving kit. We created cues for her. And she said, the coach was weirdly helpful. It really frickin' helped. She was collaborating with experts. We were collaborating with experts. So that's why one brick at a time. At Carrot, we brick people, we brick milestones, we brick anniversaries, we brick financing, we bricked our 3D printer. We build and change our company one brick at a time. And so can you. It's an awesome time to be a designer right now. People are hungry to work with designers. People are always coming out to me, these experts who say, I want to think more like a designer, and I want to make more of a change. Whether it be smoking cessation, or mental health, or spending more quality time with your family, we're able to design all of that by leading with empathy, by helping people envision the future and plan for it, by creating small cues that help people get one step closer, and by collaborating with experts. We can create sweeping change. We can do good with design. And maybe you can even get your kids out faster if you're a parent. Thanks. Mm-hmm.